a full bench of the High Court in Johannesburg will hear the urgent interdict brought by President Cyril Ramaphosa to halt an attempt by his predecessor to institute a private prosecution against him. Now, on the eve of the ANC's 55th National Conference, Zuma issued a summons against Ramaphosa, describing him as an accessory after the fact to the alleged leaking of his medical records by journalist Karyn Maughan and state prosecutor Billy Downer in the arms deal trial. Well, Newzroom Afrika's Ziyanda Ngcobo live for us outside the court this morning. Ziyanda, good morning to you. Former President Jacob Zuma accuses President Ramaphosa of violations of the NPA Act. How so?
Well, Toli, this is exactly what President Cyril Ramaphosa is saying in his papers, that on what basis are you saying that I'm a part of this? What happened to the principle of separation of powers? And surely you couldn't have expected me, as the head of the executive, to have personally intervened, or my office for that matter, that being the office of the presidency, to intervene in a court matter. Now, former President Jacob Zuma has said that he believes, however, that the president had a responsibility as the only one who is able then to come up with commissions of inquiry to be able to deal with this matter. However, you know, President Cyril Ramaphosa is saying that this is nothing but an attempt by Zuma to frustrate him and in order to attain political ends. Now, very interesting, Oli, that to note that the president himself is saying also on a procedural level, the certificate of non-prosecution that needs to be issued then by the NPA, and in this case the KwaZulu-Natal Director of Public Prosecutions, Elaine Zungu, says that hasn't been issued. So in fact the basis for the so-called private prosecution, which is meant to sit on the 19th of January, is actually it's invalid and unlawful. You'll know, Koli, just yesterday we had the foundation's Mzwanele Manyi, who was speaking about the fact that there's going to be a full bench hearing, an urgent court interdict. However, this morning we then heard from Accountability Now's advocate Paul Hoffman explaining that this is also likely done to also ensure that an appeals process isn't instituted to frustrate this process. Let's listen to what he had to say.
It happens in matters of importance, and it happens in matters where it is very clear that whoever loses is going to appeal. So rather appeal the decision of 2 or 3 judges than the decision of one judge, and cut out one stage of the appeals process. If you imagine an ordinary application heard before one judge proceeding on appeal, it is possible to go to the full bench, and then from the full bench of the High Court to the Supreme Court of Appeal, and then from the Supreme Court of Appeal to the Constitutional Court, if it's in the interest of justice, in the opinion of that court, to entertain the matter. So you see that there are several steps of appeal. By having 3 judges right from the get-go, what you do is you take out at least one stage of the appeals process.
Very important, Oli, to note that all of this is really all cascading and emanating from that arms deal trial, because it's there where the private prosecution against journalists Karyn Maughan and Billy Downer emanates, and now by extension the attempt to privately prosecute President Cyril Ramaphosa, an unprecedented moment really, where you have an incumbent and a former ANC president taking each other to court. And in fact, this is something that President Ramaphosa highlighted in his heads of arguments, which was submitted yesterday, to say that the purpose of this is to achieve some kind of political gain. However, ironically, in the papers by former President Jacob Zuma, he talks about the fact that when he tried to institute a permanent stay of prosecution for the arms deal, he was told and was quoted the Supreme Court of Appeal, where they said, after he had quoted the spy tapes, that the motive motivation for a prosecution is irrelevant if there's enough evidence for the court to be able to deal with, and if there is a prosecutable offense. So I find that to be quite ironic that he now is quoting the very, same Supreme Court of Appeal. Nevertheless, Advocate Hoffman also talking about how he also doesn't believe that the private prosecution against Karyn Maughan and Downer is even valid, and therefore by extension this also is likely to be dismissed. Let's listen to what he had to say earlier.
It's a little bit difficult to understand why the President Zuma has sought to prosecute Billy Downer and Karyn Maughan, who is the journalist that he is alleged to have illegally leaked information to. But it is certainly a huge stretch to suggest that the head of the national executive is an accessory to that crime, when our constitution has a separation of powers principle which does not allow the executive to interfere in the work of the National Prosecuting Authority.
Well, very interesting indeed. Ziyanda, let's wrap it up then. Any chance that the two presidents will likely face off in court, as in looking at each other face to face, or is it just legal teams doing that today?
Well, it would seem that the former president won't be here. In fact, I spotted his daughter, Duduzile Zuma, and Mzonele is already in the court precincts, but also it's not likely that the president will be here. It's just going to be the legal teams. And you'll remember that this is an urgent court interdict, so it's not likely to perhaps be, a full day of hearings. You remember the prerequisite for an urgent court interdict is to prove that if, the court action were to continue, it would significantly prejudice, the applicant, in this case, President Cyril Ramaphosa. And he's saying it would be in the interest of justice for this matter to be halted on the 19th of January, because at its very basis, it's based on something that doesn't exist, i.e. the nolli prosequi, the certificate that's needed to institute a private prosecution, but also that it would set a bad precedent to have, the former president really abusing court processes, and would diminish the confidence in not only the courts, the judiciary, but ultimately as well the Constitution.
Ziyanda Ngcobo, thank you very much for putting us in picture there. That's our reporter watching this space for us around this case. All right.